I believe this is probably a fair amount of people. So good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all this morning, and thank you for joining our business development webinar today. We're very excited to get stuck into the interesting topic today of the current claims fraud landscape. So it's something I'm personally very interested to hear a bit more about, and I hope you are too. So just a quick introduction, if that's all right. So I've sort of said that this is a business development webinar, and this is hosted by Zurich Club Blue. So it's part of our business development proposition, which is aiming to help brokers future-proof their businesses. And great to see so many of you here today. Speakers. So today we have two speakers with us. We have Scott Clayton. Scott has managed the Zurich Claims Investigation Unit for the last 18 years and is a director of the Insurance Fraud Bureau. We've also got Mike Richards on the call. Mike has a strong technical and operational background and leads the Zurich Casualty Fraud team. The team have secured several high-profile results and are widely respected in the market, so it's great to have them here today talking through this topic with us. A little bit of housekeeping, if that's all right, just before we start. So the session is being recorded, and this will be available at the end for everyone to see. And so we'll send that round once we've sort of kind of cut out the beginning bit, that sort of thing. And yeah, that'll be available for you guys. In terms of questions, please do, and I'm sure there will be loads, add anything to the chat that comes up as the session's going on. It'd be great to hear your thoughts and to put some questions to these guys, to Scott and Mike, to hear their expertise. So if you could put that into the chat, that would be great. We will be reading through these at the end. We've put sort of 15 minutes aside for a Q&A. So anything that comes up, please do, as the webinar is going on, give us a shout and let us know what you would like to hear about. So I believe that is all housekeeping. So I might now pass over to Scott, if that's all right, Scott, and
sure.
Let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Niall. So yeah, thanks for that introduction. I won't bore you with any more details about me other than to say that everything claims fraud related at Zurich comes into our team, and Mike Richards, my colleague, who you'll also hear from today, heads up our casualty investigation team. So what we're going to try and do, if we're going to have just the agenda slide, is talk about Zurich's fraud capability, have a bit of a line of business look at the current fraud landscape, what we're seeing out there. Going to talk about technology. Technology is something that really drives us forward at the moment, probably more so than ever. So we're going to talk about a couple of tools. One is, in particular, I'll be very surprised if there's no questions, because it involves voice analysis. You may have heard about the ClearSpeed software. So we're just going to talk about our experiences with that and our thoughts in terms of where the next direction for that is, and a few case examples along the way. Mike's going to bamboozle you with some AI examples. We often hear about AI in the marketplace, and then when somebody says, well, give us an example of it, and people start looking at their shoes, we're going to try and bring that to life a little bit in terms of what we expect to see happening over the next few months and years. So if we talk about Zurich's capability, so clearly claims fraud's a big issue for us. It's a £70 million a year problem. So if we didn't have the tools and capability and personnel to tackle this, then clearly that would have a significant effect on our overall results. And I'm not expecting to go through this structure chart line by line, but what I wanted to do was just to demonstrate the breadth of our experience and how we're set up. So within the team, we've got detection team, investigations teams, intelligence, and new technology. So they're the main disciplines within a counter fraud team. And the way that we're set up is by line of business. So you'll see that on the left-hand side, we've got a motor team led by Paul Wheeler, and they'll deal with everything from your low-level attritional whiplash type claims, soft tissue, or the new soft tissue injury type claims, right through to your organised and complex frauds, the old crash for cash days, induced accidents, etc. So that's the motor side of things. Casualty is Mike's team, and Mike will talk more about that later. Property for us is quite unique in that we investigate all property claims in-house. We don't use loss adjusters to investigate cases. We believe that, bearing in mind the vast majority of these cases are first party, it's important that we have full access to all the information that we need to make those investigations timely and relevant. So we've got teams of field investigators who are based all over the country, investigating cases face-to-face, using remote technology, which obviously was brought about just before COVID. And then we've also got a major loss team. So these are guys that are out on the road investigating the large and complex cases. So whether it's large fires, escape of water, burglary, losses, theft, etc., then we'll deploy our own resource. And every investigation that we do is underpinned by intelligence. So again, fraud investigations evolved over the years. So rather than just getting a file on your desk and getting stuck into the meat of what that claim and investigation is all about, it's important that we understand the background information, the parties involved, and so that we're going with a full, complete dimensional investigation rather than just focusing on one or two parts. So the intelligence team is another key part of what we do that faces off to the market in terms of sharing data and intelligence, industry forums such as the Insurance Fraud Bureau, Insurance Fraud Enforcement Department. And it's really important that we have that sort of intelligence link. We also, within the property team, deal with all of the lower value cases, and that's a separate team that deal with that. And they've got the link into the ClearSpeed software that we're going to talk about. So just going to bore you with our overall fraud strategy because it underpins all the work that we do. So we're very conscious that obviously we're a customer-driven business and we put the customer at the heart of what we do in the counter fraud space, whether that's protecting them from third-party fraud in motor, casualty, etc., or whether it's making sure that we are only taking cases into investigation where there is a strong suspicion of fraud. We want to make sure that that triage filtering process is as efficient as possible, because the last thing anybody wants is for genuine customers to have their claim delayed because it's been caught up in a process type of thing. So we're acutely aware that that's something that we're always working towards to make that friction as less as possible. So our commitments are to maximise the detection of fraud. We want to protect Zurich from the fraud risks, deliver the very best result in each investigation, and that's by deploying the right people and technology, and then to try and protect our customers from risk. So how do we educate customers in some of the new and emerging threats and make sure that cases are referred to us as early as possible in the process? And you'll see that we do that through deploying powerful technology, employing the best people, making sure that all of our cases have a thorough and proportionate investigation, effective collaboration, whether it's industry, other people in the industry, like other firms. One of the key things for us from a collaboration point of view is talking to other insurers about fraud. It's one of these non-competitive environments, the claims fraud space, because where we put two heads together, it's often better in terms of understanding somebody's claims profile and history. And by doing that, we want to have a strong deterrent strategy. So the IFB have recently been running campaigns to drive the message home that fraud's not tolerated and there will be penalties for it. We struggle sometimes in the courts, given that prisons are full, etc. So it's quite difficult to secure sentences and for people who have committed, larger scale frauds. But it's key that we get the message out there, particularly in the press and through media channels, that we are taking action against people who defraud us. So if I just give a bit of a gaze across the lines of business, what's keeping us busy? So if I look at property, for the last 2 or 3 years, linked to the cost of living pressures, we've seen an increase in property referrals. Now that's everything from your low-level television, mobile phone type frauds, right through to commercial frauds where you've got suspicious fires, etc. We've seen a significant increase in cannabis factories. And the more that we've delved into that, the more that we've understood about them. And it would appear that there's a large upscale in cannabis cultivation in the UK. Rather than importing cannabis, it's far more efficient for these gangs to grow it so that you're not running the risk of transport fees and obviously the risk of capture. So there's a lot of gangs coming from Eastern Europe coming in and setting up cannabis factories on an industrial scale, and they're taking advantage of unoccupied properties. So we know from liaison with the police that there's a link to organised crime linked to Western Balkans crime groups. And it's not just cannabis, they're also involved in cocaine importing and distribution. So where there's unoccupied premises and you've got a landlord that's struggling to find a tenant and someone comes along with a brown envelope and guaranteed cash every month, we're seeing some landlords drawn into the temptation to take that cash without asking any questions, and that's asking for trouble. So what we're trying to do is educate people around the risk of, in effect, your property being handed over to people who are going to be committing these type of crimes. And obviously it doesn't end well. We've seen many fires escape of waters because obviously the cultivation of cannabis relies on water and heat to grow. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. We talked about the speed of decision making, which is key. And we also want to make sure that we're embracing technology. So instead of the traditional way of a claims handler looking at a case and thinking this just doesn't look or feel right and referring it, we want to supplement that with how do we get technology involved to identify cases earlier in the process and refer them back. So examples of that is our data analytics software will run all new claims against the insurance fraud register. So anyone that pops up in the insurance fraud register would be flagged into the team straight away on day one. And also all the other intricate connections with parties and entities that would flag up to provide that bigger picture for handlers. That analytic work starts at the start of the process and continues throughout the life cycle of the claim. There's also a key thing to consider here, and what we've seen over the years is that when somebody's free and willing to lie when it comes to the claim stage, then quite often they've also lied at the underwriting stage. And that's where we can unpick problems around misrepresentation, non-disclosure, etc. And when we look at an investigation, I referred about intelligence, that also includes looking at that holistic view of the risk. So what dealings have we had with this particular individual from the start, i.e. policy inception right through to the claim, and then look at any discrepancies. So it becomes an all-encompassing investigation. And we've also got challenges around talent. Fraud investigation, it's not just a desk in the corner anymore, it's full-blown investigation teams that insurers have, and therefore it's always, as most parts of the insurance industry find, it's always difficult at times retaining your talent. If we look at motor, we could probably do a session purely on motor, given some of the challenges around fraud. In a nutshell, it feels as if the new whiplash reforms came in over 3 years ago to drive whiplash out from the market and therefore drive fraud out from the market. What that's tended to have done is drive an element of whiplash from the market and introduced a whole new myriad of claims that are associated with relatively low speed motor collisions. So if we look 3-4 years ago, very few single-digit percentage claims had psychological injuries included. Now we're seeing, certainly with some claimant law firms, over 2/3 of all claims submitted that involve a personal injury are also accompanied by psychological injuries. So, yes, we need to keep with the times and all the obviously trauma and psychological elements that go with being involved in a car crash. But it almost feels as if we've gone from having the weakest necks in the world 4 or 5 years ago to all of a sudden it's been replaced by other types of injuries, almost anything but whiplash. And this is all to do with trying to drive up claims costs, drive up fees, and we need to be we need to be vigilant around making sure that we're paying the good quickly and filtering out the suspicious and the bad into investigation. There's also more and more education around social media. So when it comes to, if I look at motor and casualty claims and the deployment of surveillance on large and complex injuries, we know that there's claimant solicitors educating their claimants to make sure that social media, for example, is closed down so that it's not portraying that all is well when actually somebody's putting in a claim for a serious injury. If we turn to casualty, we've changed the way that we detect and bring work into the team, which is benefiting the referral numbers. But just to give you a sense of context with the casualty side of things, so far this year we've saved around about £5.3 million worth of property fraud. So this is to the half year. Within motor, it's 7.9 million, and casualty, it's 22.6 million. So casualty, the ELPL, exaggerated fictitious injuries, is huge for us. And Mike will talk a bit more about some of the challenges in the casualty space. Over the years, there hasn't been any major changes in terms of the types of claims that we see. So we still see, trips, slips, exaggerated injuries, etc. But we are seeing more slip into the psychological injuries similar to motor, and the legal landscape is changing with fixed recoverable costs, etc. And claims farmers and solicitors seeing what sort of opportunities that they can make in that particular area. So what are we doing about it from a tools point of view? So I mentioned before, it's key for us to make quick decisions. So this is what we refer to as our fraud filter. The point that we want to get to is that when new and updated claims are received by Zurich, that data flows through this filter for us. Now, this is the filter that we're working on, so it's work in progress, but I thought it was important to share some of our ambitions. So we've recently announced that we've partnering with a firm called Quantexa. Now they are data analytic providers that provide that join the dots between your data and validate it against internal and external data checks. So really what we want to be able to do is build a model where as soon as we get a claim from somebody, we're able to look that up against what do we know about that individual in terms of past dealings and any other connections that they've got. So it's in effect joining a lot of the dots together. Is that person somebody that's known to us, known to the industry through industry intelligence, or is there information that would make us make a different decision on that claim? So that's heavyweight data analytics. And again, I could talk about that in more detail, but I haven't really got time today. The next layer of that is the metadata analysis. Now, through the trading of information, we receive photographs, videos, documents in support of claims. And the opportunity to create false, fake documents has never been more prevalent through the advances of technology. And we talk about shallow fakes, which are really just manipulated documents or images. And we're potentially moving into the deep fake space. And Mike's going to talk more about that later. So what we want to do is make sure that we are analysing every photograph, video, document that comes through Zurich. We want to make sure that we're checking it for, has it been manipulated? Is it an internet stock image? Is it an image that we've seen before? Is it a completely fictitious AI-generated image? So that's what we need that tool to, in effect, send all of our photographs and documents through rather than the ones that we feel are suspicious. The other aspect is ClearSpeed that I'm going to go into a bit more detail with in a minute. And then the final bit of our screen is Carpe data, and that is all of our personal injury claims are screened in effect against the internet for anything of note use on the internet on open source data that would allow us to make a different or informed decision on that claim. So for example, if someone's claiming for, they broke their ankle at work and the internet picks them up playing hooker for their local rugby team, that's something that we would obviously want to know about. So I'm just going to finish up by talking a bit about ClearSpeed. Now, ClearSpeed is software that's come into the market and has won multitude of awards because it's groundbreaking, it's new, it's something nobody's really heard of, dealt with before. And what it does is it's a voice validation tool. So when somebody makes a claim, they're invited to take part in an automated questionnaire, and that questionnaire consists of 3 or 4 questions, yes, no questions, and the software will tell with a 99% plus degree of accuracy whether those answers are accurate or not. So for example, if you were to take out a bank loan or a mortgage and your mortgage or bank provider asked you to take part in a questionnaire, they would ask you questions like, question 1, is your name Scott Clayton? Question 2, do you live at this address? Question 3, are you employed by Zurich Insurance Company? And the answers to those questions will be determined by the software whether those answers are accurate or not. So if they flag green, thanks very much, we know they're accurate and we can immediately move faster to a claims payment. So it's one of the arguably most powerful validation tools that we've come across. So I'm just going to play you a short video, and that'll just give you a bit of a background about the actual software.
Voice analysis is used in our everyday lives for authentication, security and identification purposes. Now Allied Universal have developed iInsight, powered by unique voice technology. Agnostic to language and completely unbiased, this voice technology is non-biometric and does not subjectively measure intent, stress, lies or emotion. iInsight's end-to-end solution comprises of 3 stages. At stage 1, the customer answers yes or no to 2 to 4 questions regarding their claim during an automated questionnaire. This is completed at their convenience, providing a truly self-serve experience. Speech is converted into a unique data model, which is analysed for the presence of known and proven risk-associated vocal characteristics. With a false positive rate of only 0.25%, risk ratings are produced against each answer, as well as on an overall risk score. If risk is not identified, the claim is immediately cleared. If risk is detected, our Stage 2 experts follow up to explore why there is a presence of risk in one or more of their responses. In the same way a metal detector may alert at an airport, a human follows up to identify the actual cause of the alert with the passenger. This is the purpose of iInsight's Stage 2 interactions, which intentionally uses a warm, empathy-led approach. This specialist engagement provides the opportunity for the customer to walk away or make admissions around their claim with dignity. Where risk cannot be mitigated, our Stage 3 service allows for a full investigation to be conducted. Using the Stage 1 results as the investigator's area of focus, we use advanced conversation management techniques to simultaneously ensure a positive customer experience. Accurate risk identification means much more than simply improved counter-fraud outcomes. Clients can process low-risk responses with confidence, speed and fewer touch points, reducing cycle times, lowering operational expense and enhancing customer satisfaction. Whether applied as part of a first notification of loss process or further down your claims journey, iInsight can easily integrate with your systems, creating a seamless customer experience for all manner of claim types: auto, homeowners, travel, gadget, workers' compensation and pet. The future of accurate risk identification and straight-through processing with confidence has arrived. Allied Universal Compliance and Investigations. Investigation redefined.
So I should have said at the start, the ClearSpeed is the software that they're using. iInsight is the product that Allied Universal have actually brought to the market using the ClearSpeed technology. So ClearSpeed is in the market interacting with insurers directly, or you can actually use the ClearSpeed software and the wider process by using Allied Universal. So we ran a pilot. We ran 100 claims, accidental damage, loss and theft claims through the pilot, just to see whether all the promises were true, and we were very pleasantly surprised by the results. And the real key part of this software is people who are fraudsters, who would otherwise think it fairly straightforward and easy to lie to a claims handler, lie through an internet chat, lie through an email exchange. All of a sudden, when they're faced with validation software that they realise is actually checking the answers that they're giving, that becomes a game changer. And we've seen claims being withdrawn and non-cooperation of that questionnaire because these people realise what they're up against. And so this, from a psychological point of view, is quite fascinating. And also from a future point of view, how far and wide do we deploy this technology to validate claims quicker? Because the quicker we can validate claims, then obviously the quicker we can pay them, and we can pay them with more confidence. So we're acutely aware that this is a very powerful tool. We've only used it in 100 cases. We're going to extend with another pilot to use it on a few more cases and develop our knowledge of this and test and learn. So I thought it was important today to just bring this to your attention if those people hadn't heard of it, because if you do hear from it in the future, then ClearSpeed or iInsight is something that not just Zurich but other insurers are starting to use. And we would be happy to answer any, or I would be happy to answer any questions at the end of this, if you've got them about that. But in the meantime, I'll pass over to Mike, and Mike's going to take you through some more examples and experiences from a casualty point of view.
Thanks, Scott. So for the first section of my slot, I'm going to stick with the theme of technology and innovation. So in 2019, I did a presentation where hypothetically I discussed how a fraudster could make a fictitious loss claim in the casualty arena utilizing technology. So I found a defect on the internet. I put a case study where I sought some form of medical attention. I allegedly reported the accident and remained consistent throughout the case. And then as a webinar, I looked about how one could effectively go about disproving this claim, looking at the case weaknesses and investigation opportunities. And ultimately, there were some clear red flags. And with further investigation, it was quite clear that that case wouldn't have been successful. But ultimately, and the purpose of it really was to show how fraudsters could utilize the advancement of technology. For example, that Fix My Street screenshot you can see on the slide there. So now we move 5 years on and we're in 2024. So what does a fictitious loss casualty claim potentially look like in 2024 if one was going to hypothetically make one? So I did a presentation a few months ago. It was a hotel, and for this hypothetical scenario, that's the hotel that I've used. Allegedly, this accident happened on the 1st of March 2023. It was dark, there was branches, there was a pothole, and on the lead up to reception, as I walked to check in, I fell on my face, sustaining a scar to my forehead that could lead to permanent injuries to my face, as well as bruising around my eye. But unlike the 2019 hypothetical situation, I drafted a letter to the manager to report the claim at the time, to hypothetically give that form of corroborative evidence. So I opted for quite an informal style as opposed to a letter referring to legal terminology. So there's no Occupiers Liability Act, etc. If you have a read, you'll see reference to things like a pesky pothole. But there was also an underlying urgency as well to the letter, so a reference to financial stress, a legal route if necessary, and also potential time off work. You might also note the wizarding theme as well on that letter. But also in this hypothetical situation, there was also photographs of the injury. So here you can see the scar to my forehead, the bloody nose, and also the eye injury. And if anyone's questioning or a little bit skeptical about that photograph, when you take a deeper look and look at the metadata itself, you'll actually see it was taken at the hotel in Manchester on the 1st of March 2023, according to the metadata. In terms of defects, so there's also a defect of a photo taken at night. You can see the pothole there, as well as the branches that lie on the floor. So if we move to the next slide, if someone's questioning whether or not I was actually injured, what you can see here is a well set out medical report that corroborates my injuries, as well as a prognosis period as well. So I don't know if anybody just perusing those documents saw a few red flags and indicators. By all means, pop them in the chat if you did. But now what I'll do is just move on to those documents and let's have a little bit of a closer look. So I don't know whether everyone actually noticed it was me for the purposes of this example, but there is a photograph of me. And utilising generative AI tools, we were quite easily able to manipulate this image. So we added the Harry Potter-esque scar, the bruising to the eye, you know, the beard, the T-shirt. And the thing about this, we weren't kind of wizards on Photoshop. These were quite simple tasks being asked to the generative AI software. So can you turn the T-shirt blue, for example? And you can quite clearly see from the photograph that it did. Now, if you look very closely, for example, if you look closely at the eye, you will see there's a slight difference in colour, also a difference in size. You might look at the beard and see that it's quite patchy. But one has to question, would everybody, when they saw a new claim come through, notice that this was a manipulated image? So if Also, in terms of the metadata, just to add, you can see on the slide there as well, this wasn't AI, but at the top right-hand corner, you'll see adjust. So on new iPhones, it's relatively simple and quite dangerously slow to actually adjust the metadata. So you can adjust the location, the incident date, etc. Some of the technologies that Scott referred to can pick up where there has been metadata manipulation, but that is something to note. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll just take a little bit of a look at the defect images. So that was the original image taken from the travel website, and there you can see the manipulated image with AI that adds the pothole as well as the branches. I don't know whether anyone picked this up from a brief look at that image, but if you look closely, again, I think the pothole is very spherical in nature. If you look incredibly closely, you can actually see the lines of the pavement that go through it. The branches, again, if you really zoom into them, they almost look like they've been placed on top, almost like floating in the air. But again, would somebody notice this at an initial quick glance? And what I would say, again, this was just simple instructions to a generative AI tool. If someone spent a lot of time on Photoshop, they could easily make these images look a lot more realistic. So if we move on to the next slide, this is an example, and perhaps one of the biggest breakthroughs from an AI perspective in relatively recent history, and this is the use of large language models. So we started with a direct question, you can see there. How do I make a fraudulent claim? And for those that are familiar with large language models, you'll know that it will not assist for nefarious purposes. However, fraudsters do try and jailbreak ChatGPT. So this is a way in which you can reframe questions to elicit different responses. So you can see an example of where we've reframed a question there, and we do get a little bit of advice in terms of how to make a claim. There's seek medical attention, report the incident, document the incident, corroborate with insurance companies, various instructions from the AI tool you can see there. So then we moved on to another area, and that was asking the chatbot whether or not it could write an email for us. And I'm sure many of you have probably done cybercrime training and seen phishing type emails. And there's often almost red flags and key indicators that it's a phishing email. That may be particularly the use of the language, spelling mistakes, etc. So we were very curious in terms of whether or not the request to write an email relating to this accident would be cogent in nature, or would it be quite easily to pick up? So what we do is we say, write me an email, say I fell over a pothole at the Marriott Hotel in Manchester, say I injured my eye and forehead and could be left with a permanent scar. We also mention a little bit about the urgency as well when we put it into the ChatGPT. Something we were also quite curious on was in terms of how quickly we would get a response as well. Would we be waiting a long time? You saw from the previous question it was relatively quick. So yeah, it's probably less than a second in terms of us being able to get a response to that question. And I actually read through this email a number of times, and it was incredibly difficult to note that this was something that was computer generated. My view was that potentially it was a little formal in terms of its nature. One could have argued it looks like a potential letter of claim template or something that was taken off the internet. So what I decided to do was ask the chatbot whether or not it could tweak the email, make it sound less formal, but also add some urgency, as quite often when we see litigant in-person claims, there are threats, and they can be incredibly urgent in terms of being able to elicit a response. So this is where we get the reference to pesky pothole. Again, I'm not sure whether anyone noticed that when we showed the initial documents, but it's a lot more informal in terms of its nature. And another point just to note, and again, when you were looking at those documents, whether or not this was picked up, what I would say was that the medical report as well, that was again created by a large language model. The only amendment to it was the prognosis, and we just tweaked that there. But the whole template and the response was also created by the large language model itself. So if we now move on to the next slide, and Scott did make reference to this, but I'm just going to cover it in a little bit more detail. And this is to a term that has been called shallow fakes. So I don't know whether you've come across this term, but in essence, shallow fakes are when images are being manipulated utilizing editing tools, a little bit like my face in that case study there. You might also hear of the term deep fake. So this is similar, but this relates to where videos are digitally altered. You know, there's some examples that have been lately quite common on social media. I think there's also on television as well some examples of where deep fakes have been used. But in terms of the insurance industry at the moment, we are seeing shallow fakes. And whilst these editing tools are rather basic in nature, they can lead to quite realistic images being created. So these shallow fakes have been more commonplace, I would say, in motor. So we've seen them in support of a contrived claim. So this is a contrived claim is a fraudulent claim, which is almost completely paper-based, and the vehicles have not actually collided at all. The fraudsters are obtaining details of Zurich customers via complex methods, so referred to as account takeover, and reporting fictitious accidents. So you can see on the example on the slide here, the number plates have been changed, and also the background on the boards behind the vehicle have also been amended too. So now what I wanted to do was building on your knowledge of shallow fakes, and to my point, it's not just motor, we've also seen them in property as well in regards to invoices. If we move to the next slide, we're going to play a game of can you spot the genuine invoice? So we'll see how this works on the chat. So one of these invoices are genuine and two are fake. So if you could put the genuine invoice in the chat. So are we going for A, B or C? Hopefully this will work. If not, we can cover this at the end. But which one do you think is the genuine invoice? So we've already got quite a lot of C's coming in. Is anyone going to go for a different letter? We'll wait and see. But just to give you a bit more context, so the first one is a receipt from Sainsbury's. The second one, B, is from a Chinese takeaway, and C is from Morrison's. So we've got the majority a C, but also a couple of B's in there as well. And Richard's gone for A. That's the first A that we've seen. So what we'll do is I'll just talk you through those invoices now as you still make some guesses. So the first one, so this is invoice A. This was actually provided in a student insured loss that Zurich insure. This related to a fridge failure, so a power cut. And we saw a number of items being claimed for as a result. Not many of you said A, and you were right not to say A. I think you would have probably spotted that 4 gala apples for £11.50 is a bit steep, as well as the 1.5 litre bottle of Evian water but £11.25. And another clear red flag is the Yellowtail Merlot at £88 for 2 bottles. So that was an example of where it was a fake and it had been manipulated and provided to Zurich. So B, a number of you said B. So this again was a student claim that we'd seen. Those mathematicians amongst you might have calculated it and realised that they didn't add up to the total amount. You'll also see boiled rice for £15, I think was a bit of a red flag on that one. And then lastly, that it was a Morrison's shop and that was my food shop. So I hope that wasn't a spurious invoice. I think that was the genuine one. So just to move on, the final slide from me, or the penultimate slide, sorry, and this is around professional enablers. And I really think this is important just to spend a few minutes on to get that awareness of enablers to fraud and the behaviours that we're seeing across the industry. And I suppose the caveat really is I'm not tarring all solicitors or claims management companies, credit hire companies, etc. with the same brush, but these are some of the examples that we're alive to across the industry. So the first one is solicitors paying referral fees off the back of illegally purchased data. So a few major insurers that I'm aware of have been victims of employee data theft. This is where personal data has been stolen and then sold, and as a result various claims are submitted. There's talk of this type of data being sold on the dark web for considerable sums of money. The second one is aggressive advertising, including the bullying of vulnerable and elderly people into making claims. So this is all around asking participants whether or not they've seen. So I don't know whether anyone's actually seen cold calls. They were incredibly prevalent back with PPI, and also as a result of crash for cash epidemic and the whiplash epidemic. But we are still seeing these in a number of areas now. So this is where vulnerable and elderly people are being targeted, being told they're entitled to compensation, and they just need to provide basic details. We've actually had Zurich cases where people are found to be fraudulent, and they've actually said the reason why they made these claims was due to the bombardment of calls that they were receiving. The next two are kind of linked, and this is around claimant solicitors pursuing litigating claims without the knowledge or consent of their client, as well as limited evidence of solicitors trying to vet the quality of referrals or getting to know their clients. So this was incredibly prevalent with holiday sickness cases, and more recently we've seen this with cavity wall insulation claims. So this was individuals being told that it would be a no-win, no-fee basis agreement, that they would get their case settled quickly. And now what we've seen, actually, solicitors have gone into administration, leaving claimants with quite big legal bills. The next behaviour is around coaching claimants to exaggerate claims. So I think if you go onto most claimant solicitors' websites, there'll be advice around managing social media, anti-surveillance advice. They're trying to ensure, in essence, their clients aren't caught out. And it's really important to note, and linking into this, is a lot of claimants sign up to damages-based agreements, so DBAs. Therefore, solicitors may get a proportion of the claimant's damages. And lastly, cost fraud. So there have been examples of where solicitors have been shut down by the Solicitors Regulation Authority as a result of there being cost layering. So now, just to conclude, I'm conscious we've gone this whole session without a video of a fraudulent claim, so I'm not going to disappoint, and I'm going to show you an example of one we've seen in casualty. So this is a claimant alleged that it's being got caught in a door as a result of wind blowing and crushing his thumb. If we play that one more time, I don't know whether some of you saw that, but in essence, you will see that it didn't occur as alleged. The claimant deliberately places his thumb into the hinge of the door and then uses his other hand to close the door onto his thumb and submitted a significant casualty claim. His thumb actually required surgery as a result of that accident. Just really chose that one because it shows the lengths that individuals are prepared to go for financial gain. So that comes to the end of my slot. I think I'll now hand over back for questions.
Yes, thank you very much for that, and thanks to both of you, Scott and Mike, for running through the content there. It was really interesting, and I hope everyone on the call thought the same. So if anyone has any questions, as I said, please do feel free to add them to the Q&A. There was certainly one that I think would be good to run through from Samantha. So Scott, I think this might be one for you, if that's all right. It is, can ClearSpeed and voice validation detect where the voice is AI voice cloning and not the real person?
Oh, what a great question. So the short answer is yes. The software is able to detect when it is a system-generated voice rather than somebody else's, because there's a series of questions that are asked at the start to, in effect, get that biometric pattern of that person's voice. So we've seen examples or heard examples of where people have played a recording into the call and the system's immediately said, no, this is not the real person talking. So it's able to do that. And it's also able to determine whether anybody's suffering from particular medical conditions that might influence their answers. So it's been tested against all the medical conditions that they can certainly think about coming across to see whether there was any that would obviously influence someone's answer. So we've yet to come across anything that hasn't been prepared for, touch wood.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I can see that Sarah has her hand up. So I think it might have just gone down again, actually. So I'm not sure, Sarah, if there's something you want to add into the Q&A. We have something that has just come through from Seb. I'm not sure which one of you wants to take this one on. Where do you place loss assessors who are known to exaggerate claims as they take a cut from the claims proceeds indirectly from contractors, the insured?
So we've seen an increase in loss assessors on claims recently, and they present a challenge to us because, you know, when we are looking at a loss, assessing a loss, working with our loss adjusting partners, it's very important for us that we do everything that we can to put people back into their pre-loss positions as quickly as possible. And we see at times that loss assessors who, you know, some of whom claim to be there for all the right intentions actually delay the process and are actually not doing anything that would benefit the policyholder. So they're a challenge to us. And if I look at the real sort of dirty end of loss assessing, then it's something that we're in consultation with the Insurance Fraud Bureau and other insurers who are encountering challenges with similar firms. So it's a topic that we're certainly alive to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Scott. We have another question that is coming from Sarah. So if a client withdraws their claims graciously, does this flag at renewal, or do you look to cancel midterm as a fraud flag?
So different insurers will have different approaches here. Our approach so far has been if somebody withdraws their claim, we invite them to cancel their policy, because in effect we are by inference suggesting that this claim wasn't genuine and it's somebody that we wouldn't necessarily want to be insuring in the future. Well, one thing we have seen through the years and trends of insurance is that there are often people who will try and make a fraudulent claim at low value, get away with it, and then come back for a bigger chunk. And it almost becomes that greed and fueling the greed. So it's important, if we identify somebody that has crossed the line into dishonest behaviour, that we take a firm line, and that would invite them to withdraw. And not if they're withdrawing the claim, then we'd invite them to cancel the policy and walk away.
Sure, brilliant. Thank you very much. We have another one that's coming from Matt. So is vehicle damage fraud overtaking personal injury fraud in the motor arena due to lower injury tariffs?
So it's not overtaking, it's certainly a bigger component than it used to be, but I would also put credit hire in alongside the vehicle damage. The difficulty with vehicle damage from a fraudster's point of view is it's not as subjective. You've either got a car damaged and it's going to cost X to repair it or not. And you know, where we've been surprised, shocked, and almost like really quite concerned about the future is the example that Mike shared around the shallow fake and the changes in registration. Because what happened there was we were presented with claims for vehicles that were obviously damaged considerably to write them off. we'd also had repair estimates, engineer's report, and invoices showing that the car had been repaired, and it was presented as a fault claim against our policyholder and somebody who was looking for quick payment. Now, that was purely a paper-based accident trail. There was no vehicle damage other than obviously the car that was sat in the salvage yard. Now, we found that that's a fraud ring. That's an operation that, again, is attracting attention through wider circles. And I suppose the biggest problem in our world is you only know what you know. You don't know what's going on that we're not detecting, and that's the bit that keeps us awake, and that's the bit that drives us to try and find new solutions to problems we probably don't even know about. So I would say that we're still, the majority of our time is taking up defending and considering the personal injury element of motor, but the damage and credit hire is a higher proportion than it used to be.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Scott. We have a question here from Sue. So Sue has said, I'm fascinated as to how ClearSpeed is a lie detector based on just yes/no questions with no behavioural triggers or bias. Are you able to provide any more detail into how this works?
So, I mean, yeah, we were fascinated as well. I'll give you a bit of context because I know that we've got a little bit of time left in terms of where this originated from. So the CIA were in conjunction with ClearSpeed around developing a tool that allowed them to make quick decisions over who was granted access to Afghanistan camps. Now, they are clearly life-death situations where normal due diligence takes a lot of time before someone's granted a pass and therefore access. So the software was developed to find out whether these people were telling the truth and could be allowed access. Now, the way that it's been described to me, and I'll make a terrible job describing this back, is that when the brain engages with the vocal cords to actually speak, there are about 400 nodes that transfer between the brain. Here's me pointing towards my brain and my voice. There's about 400 nodes that transfer between your brain and your voice, and 40 of them are relative to risk. So what the software is able to do is pinpoint on those 40 risk nodes and identify patterns that would cause an anomaly. Now, how they do that, I have no idea, but A, that they've got the ability to do that, and B, they can do that with the accuracy that they've got is really quite astonishing. And to give you a wider context, of those 400 nodes, 40 are risk. Some other ones are relative to medical conditions. So there is technology out there now that can diagnose certain medical conditions based on someone talking. So this is just how science is developing and technology is developing to the point where it's coming into our space and seeing what use it will be. We've also heard that they're deploying it in lots of different scenarios. So, for example, there was an ice hockey team in the States who there was huge suggestions that they were involved in match fixing. So every player on that team went through this particular software and they all passed. So any suggestions of match fixing were completely done away with. And there's lots of other, I mean, the police are trialing it. There's a police force trialing it with witnesses to see whether witnesses are telling the truth. You know, there's no kind of ceiling to where this potentially could go. The key thing for me is we've got to make sure that it's, in effect, as accurate as it is all the time. You know, and that's why we're taking small steps with it. We don't want to run too quickly with this, given how powerful it is. Sorry, it's a long answer to your question, but I hope it gives it a little bit more context.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Scott. We have a question here from Joanne, who has said, do you feel that AI will be a greater challenge for you in the future when combating fraudulent claims?
I'm going to hand this to Mike, but before I do, I actually said, the joke for me is when I thought that when deepfakes were here, I'd be long retired, gone, thanks very much, not my problem anymore. And then I've got someone in Mike's team creating all these fancy new claims completely generated from AI. So it's a real concern, but Mike, over to you.
Yeah, I echo exactly what Scott has said. I think the short answer is yes. And going back to Scott's slide on the fraud, a filter for the future, that's kind of imperative for us to have that there. And particularly Quantexa and the capabilities of that software is absolutely incredible. And I know that question focuses very much in terms of the challenges, but I think it also brings real benefits for us as well in terms of our ability to detect and prevent fraud in the future. Quantex, as an example, uses the large language tools that an example that I showed earlier, which will be fantastic for investigators of the future too.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. I have a question here from Charlotte, who has asked, following on from one of the previous questions, does Zurich report claims where there are concerns and fraud identified to IFED/action fraud if the claim has been withdrawn and policy cancelled?
No. So if somebody withdraws their claim and the policy is cancelled, or they're cancelling the policy, then that's the end of it, because that's the whole sort of drawing a line under the marker. The key thing for us is, and I'm not just going to go over what I said before, is that there's some action taken around the policy. But no, that brings an end to it. They wouldn't be added to the insurance fraud register. Anything taken with IFED or action fraud beyond that. I mean, the industry often talks about walkaways as being a success, and yes, they are in terms of deterring that particular claim, but do they actually deter the person? And there's a wider conversation around that. I mean, just while I'm talking now, sorry, I just wanted to say that, when it comes to counter fraud, yes, we've got these tools, yes, we've got these people, but we rely on everybody in the industry, having that sort of intuition, that sort of, it doesn't quite look or feel right, and flagging it up, and that completely involves our brokering partners and, everybody connected to the claims process. The plea is, if you're talking to people about fraud and, saying CCTV, dashed cam footage, yeah, that's all brilliant telematics data, but there's nothing that replaces the gut instinct. And I would just encourage people to follow their gut. And if they see or feel something that's not quite right, please always flag it to an insurer. They will always appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much again, Scott. So we might have time for one or two, probably one more question, as we're on 10:59. And this is one from Jazz, and this is quite a good one to end on, I think. What is currently the single biggest fraud threat in the insurance industry, and how severe could this get if left unchecked?
You want to go, Scott, or do you want me to
go? You go for it, yeah.
I think if we talk in scale in terms of biggest, I'd probably go for exaggeration, particularly in the injury element. And I think what we've seen across the industry over particularly, I'd say, the last 10 years or so, a little bit of a reversal in terms of the approach that's taken to exaggeration genuinely. So we're talking opportunistic fraud with a genuine incident and then some embellishment of it. And I think a key change for me was the implementation of the Criminal Courts and Justice Act 2015, Section 57. And we are seeing, I think, an increase in appetite of its usage, and case law is leading that way, which is encouraging for us. Do I think more could be done from a judicial legislative perspective in the future? Potentially, moving into certain areas, but I think that was a welcome change for us.
I can't add any more to that, fair play, apart from the fact that I'm going to get kicked out of this room, so probably best I don't.
All right. Well, look, thank you both so much, Scott and Mike, for talking to us today. And sorry we couldn't get through all of the questions. I think this is one of those topics where we could probably be here all day. Sadly, we've got through what we can. But thank you to everyone for joining. It's been great to see you, and a copy of this webinar will be made available. If not later today, then it will be sometime this week. So thanks very much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.